Hello, everyone. Dr. Eames here. Our topic this time is communicating in the digital age. Let's take a look first at our learning objectives. By the time you finish engaging with this material, you should be able to explain the conduit and the perceptual process models of communication, understand the barriers to effective communication, describe the effects of social media on communication, be able to relate the basics of interpersonal communication, and demonstrate some knowledge of nonverbal communication. Let's start with the conduit model of communication. As you can see here, there's a speaker and there's a listener. And the communication is going to proceed word by word. And the implication here is that every word goes completely across from one to the other, and that everything is completely understood, and there is no misconception. Basically, this is a pipeline. Something comes out of, is injected into the pipeline from the speaker. It travels to the listener, and the listener understands everything. So basically, a pipeline metaphor. And this is a model of the way we used to describe communication in the past. But this really no longer applies. It's just simply too simplistic. Um, First of all, the implication and the meaning are not simply transferred person to person, and that's where the model really falls. Today, we look at it as an unrealistic model because of that. The problem is really that the intended meaning doesn't always come across when we communicate with another person. And we know this is true. Just think about in your own lives. People have communication misunderstandings all the time. Now, communication itself is just the interpersonal exchange of information and meaning. So, if we're going to engage in some communication, we certainly want to make sure that things are understood from what we're trying to transmit and that people get the intended meaning. What we really find is more reality today is the perceptual process of communication. And as you can see from the graphic here, there's a lot more going on. I'd like to play you a simple short video from YouTube that really explains it in very good terms, and it's somewhat entertaining along the way.
Every day we communicate. Communication happens through conversations, posters, or glances across a room. In fact, most communication occurs without much effort on our parts, or even opening our mouths. In Module 1, we will take a look at the big picture of communication and examine its basic elements. Communication starts with an idea. To be able to communicate, we must have an idea, a notion, something we want to express, information to share, etc. Our past experiences, values, attitudes, knowledge, culture, feelings all influence our ideas and the way that we interpret the ideas of others. These influences are our unique perceptions or the way we view things around us. Before ideas can be transmitted to another person or group, we must encode these ideas. Think back to your history classes or football. What does a group at war or a team do when they don't want the other side or team to understand? They place that information or team play into code. In other words, they encode the idea. Now that the idea is encoded, it's ready to be transmitted or sent to another person or group. The encoded idea is called the message. The message is sent to a receiver. This is just like in a football game. The receiver is to catch the football. A telephone has a receiver in which you are able to hear the person on the other end of the line. The receiver must then interpret the message by filtering the new information through their past experiences, culture, attitudes, values, knowledge, and feelings. This interpretation is called decoding the message. The sender needs to make sure that the receiver understood the message. Therefore, it is the receiver's job to convey a message back. The receiver's reply to the sender is called feedback. The feedback allows the sender to ensure that the original message was interpreted correctly by the receiver. Once the cycle has gone full circle, it will repeat itself for as long as the conversation continues. We could even say that the sender and receiver change roles throughout the process, depending on who is sending the message and who is responding to feedback. Now that we understand the general idea about how the cycle works, let's look at a few other pieces of the communication process. The messages that are transmitted between senders and receivers are sent through channels. The channel essentially determines how the message will be sent. For example, if I wanted to tell someone hello, I could wave, say hello, or text hi to someone with my cell phone. The messages will be the same, however, the manner in which I chose to send it varies. Think about the decisions that you have to make if you want to give someone a present. Will you give it to them yourself, mail it through the post office, or ask a friend to deliver it for you? Messages can be sent through many channels. For example, speaking face-to-face, instant messaging, writing letters, making facial expressions, or even watching television. Another important piece of the communication process is the context in which a communication takes place. The context includes everything from the emotions of the communicators, the reasons for the communication taking place, and where the actual communication takes place. So far, we have looked at the communication process and how it works in ideal situations. However, sometimes the process is interrupted. Something that interrupts, distorts, blocks, or interferes with the process is referred to as a communication barrier. Loud noises, bad phone connections, language, attitude about the topic or speaker, the temperature, and a broken hearing aid are all examples of the communication barriers.
If working all the time,
Okay, as you can see, there's a lot more going on when we try and communicate than a simple pipeline where information is transmitted and it's perfectly understood and received on the other end. So to sum up that video just briefly, we have a sender, a message, and a receiver during the communication process. The message is encoded and it's decoded on the other end. The sender, though, selects the medium or the channel. The receiver decodes, creates meaning from the message, gives some feedback. And then we run into the problems of barriers to communication, which are really a variety of different noise as it's listed here. So those barriers to effective communication really fall into three categories: personal barriers, physical barriers, and semantic barriers. The the personal barriers are really about us as individuals. So our individual attributes are sometimes hindering communication. And simply, some people communicate better than others. It does help if you know a foreign language. So people that know a second language sometimes have a real advantage in communication. Um, but we're talking about a whole variety of things here when we talk about communicating. We're talking about speaking skills, certainly, but also listening skills, having a suitable vocabulary, the use of gestures, having writing skills, and having indeed social skills. And some individuals have just never developed these skills, or some of them, and it makes a big difference in the success or the effectiveness, you might say, of your communications. Um, so your frame of reference in life affects your ability to process and interpret information. So we have a lot of potential barriers to effective communication right there. So it does matter about the environment you grew up in and the values that your parents instilled in you when it comes to understanding messages and meaning. This really refers in some ways to our selective perception and the information that we allow into our conscious mind and the information that we shut out and exclude immediately. So personal trust does matter in communication. If you have distrust, for example, then you may experience some distortion in your communication with those individuals that some distrust exists. Your attitude towards that individual is going to affect your level of communication. If you harbor some stereotypical thinking, it will come out eventually in your interpersonal communications. Few people can really hide their stereotypical thinking for very long. And as soon as we are tired or rushed or excited, the real person, the real individual often comes out and people see who and what you are. So obviously, stereotypical thinking is going to influence what we see and what we hear and what we remember and recall. And that's the thing. Our personal characteristics are always with us. For instance, our ego. This can cause all types of problems that affect our communication. And so ego-related problems with communication include things like having pride, or maybe, well, too much pride, inflated self-esteem, having an arrogant attitude, feelings of superiority, or even a condescending attitude. So communication is obviously a two-way process most of the time. It's between you and another person. But if you have poor listening skills, you won't be able to communicate effectively. Um, and of course, we want to really hammer on what is the word effective means. That means in this case that your message is understood accurately. In other words, the receiver of the communication understands the intent of your meaning. And that's the problem with barriers to communication. They distort the intent of your meaning. But because we're human, we all have this, I think, natural tendency to view everything from our own personal perspective. In other words, the concept of bounded rationality comes into play during every interpersonal communication. So in plain language, we operate within our own perceived day-to-day reality. And it becomes difficult for many of us, or we never even give it any consideration to fully understand sometimes another person's perspective. And this happens especially if there are strong emotions or feelings associated with the issue. Many times as individuals, when we listen, we don't listen with some understanding. We might be thinking about what we want to say in reply. We might be thinking about still dwelling on a previous comment we disagreed with. Um, and then we miss what's happening along the way. Um, Learning to listen with understanding usually means you have to learn how to concentrate better. And so keep your focus when you're communicating. You will have a better chance of understanding the intent of the communication when you get feedback. So also, you have to finally understand and use nonverbal means of communication. And we'll explore this a little bit more as we move along here. But this means using appropriate gestures, facial expression, posture, tone of voice. All of those things are nonverbal communication. Now, physical barriers are like the textbook says, barriers of time, space, and sound, and other things that distract from communicating effectively. The distance between you and the person you're communicating with, for example, does have something to do with how successful the communication will be. And the general environment, the context that our little video talked about. Is it distracting, busy, complex, noisy, quiet? Um, or is it an environment that is really conducive to meaningful communication? This is why office design is still an important organizational issue when it comes to creating a collaborative atmosphere. And it's important for organizations to understand that and rely on collaboration to spark innovation. If they do so, then they have to create the perfect context for it. And then we, of course, have semantic barriers, which semantics, of course, is the study of words. And this is probably more important than ever in contemporary times now because of increased globalization, because we have multicultural workforces all around the world. We simply are forced to work a little harder to understand each other through necessity. And this is probably also why knowing a second language does help you to be a better communicator and more effective communicator. Now, there are a few things to say, comment on about semantic barriers. They include jargon and buzzwords. Jargon, first of all, is language specific to some group or some industry or some profession. And we have plenty of jargon, for instance, in the educational field, words that we use here that no one else uses very often. The military, for instance, has a very familiar jargon to most of us because that military jargon is spilled over into real life for many of us. And we know a word that really has a military origin when we hear it most of the time. Um, MOS, for example. If a military person says they have an MOS, then we generally know we're talking about their occupation. Military occupational specialty is what that stands for. It's jargon, and every industry does have it. Um, Now, there are also buzzwords out there in common use. These are generally overused phrases. They're words, jingles, and after a while, it's hard to pin them down when they began, and you hope many times that you don't have to hear them again and that they go away. Um, it happens a lot in society. They're fad words and phrases. Sometimes they stick, sometimes they go away. But they're very annoying in communication, quite honestly, because, for instance, if you use jargon, you may completely lose the effectiveness of your communication with the other person if they don't understand your jargon. When it comes to buzzwords, though, it may cause them to reflect on you a certain way. The buzzwords might often be associated with certain generational cohorts or time periods or certain way of thinking or doing things. So you should be careful about using buzzwords. They can be interpreted in different ways. And some of us just get so annoyed, quite honestly, with it. Um, Let me give you an example. The bottom line. How many times have you heard people say the bottom line? I can't tell you which previous decade we started hearing that, but I think it was in maybe the 80s. For certain, they were using it in the 90s, the bottom line. And I'm just a little tired of hearing it myself. But then I tend to use some buzzwords myself that I think are fairly neutral. A lot of times you may hear me say, to sum up a lecture or something, I may say something like, well, at the end of the day, folks, and as a means of doing it. That's also a buzzword phrase as well. The one, I'll tell you, my personal peeve is when people say not too shabby, I just want to slap them. Well, not really. But it just annoys the heck out of me. I hated that phrase when it came along in the 60s. I just thought it was trite and silly. I still feel that way when I hear it. I immediately make association back to the 60s when I first started hearing that phrase to thinking, is that person mired in a time warp? So that's the impact that using jargon and buzzwords can have on your communication effectiveness. They do become barriers at a certain point. We certainly have to talk about social media and its impact on communication because today it is very much a part of our life. As it says here, it influences every aspect of organizational life. I mean, organizations are generally going to have at least two social presences out there that anybody can access. In other words, they're going to have a Facebook page and then they're going to have their organization web page, website. So there is where you influence the public, where the public influences you. And so organizations use some form of social media quite often to gather information about individuals they employ. They may, the HR department, depending if they want to find out something, may look and see, do you have a Facebook page that doesn't have privacy settings that forbid anybody from looking? And if it's open to the public, they'll take a look. Certainly, people who are hiring and recruiting people use social media. If they have a serious interest in several candidates and they need to find out who really fits best, they may say, well, let's see if they have a Facebook page we can view and what kind of crazy stuff have they posted and are they a good fit for us? So organizations use social media in a variety of ways. They also use it to pull people in and use it for customer relationship management and all that kind of thing. You cannot ignore the effect and the impact of social media. If you're a manager, you have to participate in it. You have to understand it. And indeed, you have to use it for your own purposes as an organization. Um, so you have to have it as part of your toolkit. When it comes to interpersonal communication, we really want to be competent. And being competent in communication means you're effective, which I've already talked about. Um, and so we can control some things in the communication process. We can control, for instance, whether or not we are assertive or whether we are aggressive. or whether we are completely non-assertive. These are very different concepts and they're different approaches. It's the way you present yourself and so forth. So I urge you to take a look at the discussions in the textbook on this, and as well as this next topic here, active listening. Because active listening is more than just exchanging information with people. It's really concentrating and focusing on the communication so that there's no mistake in what you're saying and that you are indeed understanding the feedback and what other people are saying. You're not merely hearing. In other words, you are paying attention and you're concentrating. That is active listening, and it includes so many of the various factors I've talked about and that I will talk about here in a few moments. And certainly, you have to recognize that women and men communicate differently. There are these gender differences. Um, and men seem to be much more about the facts and reporting things and sticking to a schedule in their communications. And indeed, men are much more domineering, quite often, much more aggressive. One of the real criticisms of female communication styles is maybe not women as in a general group aren't assertive enough. Well, certainly I think that's a problem that's going away, but it is something to pay attention to. Being assertive doesn't mean you have to be aggressive. Being assertive means you are confident, you present things as you know them, you're not afraid to speak up when you have the facts, and you're not in a threatening manner, of course, but it's different from being aggressive, which tends to have a sort of hostile intent, a feeling to it. And so assertive and aggressive are quite different. And then, of course, being non-assertive, where you just don't stand up for your rights, you don't make comments back, that you do let yourself sort of be verbally pushed around, and that's being non-assertive, and you don't want to be that either. But we do find these differences in genders. The men, well, they're going to report the facts and be very factual and so forth, and generally be in a hurry. They're the big interrupters compared to women in general. Women generally want to make sure that both sides understand what the communication is about. They're more apt to want to build rapport and concentrate on trust, and more willing to discuss the facts than perhaps maybe men are. But remember, these are generalized sort of comments here. Here's some nonverbal communication for you. Here's 18 different faces from the same little boy. And I think if we took the time to go through them, we could say, we could come up with the adjective that describes each one of these faces if we knocked it around a little bit. And I bet you we could even come up with a few more. This shows you the power of a facial expression in conveying meaning. Um, and so certainly these 18 right here, I think put that point right across. But this is a very Western idea here also. In the West, and I'm talking about the whole world in general, in the West, in Western society, we tend to express our emotion a little bit more in our face than, say, compared to the Eastern world, which is more Asian, which is more reserved, which culturally, depending on where you're at and what particular type of people, are not going to express as much emotion in your facial expression. You're not going to let things out. It's a different way of viewing and operating in the world. Indeed, the bounded rationality is different. But in the West here, we tend to do this, and you can see how it really does communicate. Many of us allow this emotion to come right out. And in other words, we have no poker face, and people do not have much confusion at all about where you're coming from. You may be saying one thing, but they look at your facial expression and go, I get what's really going on here. Nonverbal communication really is so powerful. Look at this one pie chart here, for instance. Words only convey about 7% of the meaning of any given face-to-face communication. The tone of your voice, well over a third of the meaning comes from the tone of your voice. Now, your physiology is more than half. So that's this stuff here. Verbal, facial expressions. Look at Georgie boy here, George Bush. He's at a United Nations session here, and he was just not happy with what he's hearing. Isn't that clear from his expression? He's going, oh my gosh, what do I say to this? And here, is this it? Yeah. Look at these people up here. In generally, we see a lot of excitement, freaking out level, which is a level of excitement. Can't believe it, disbelief, extreme happiness, and it goes on and on. Here, where we really look in this physiology idea, our posture. And so these are very general things, but sometimes, say, if a person is standing there, they got their head tilted a little bit, they got that nondescript expression, hands are deep in their pockets. If they are leaning one way or the other, not only are they likely bored with what you're saying, they're ready to bail out and hit the road. Here, sometimes people interpret hands on hips as a defensive uh, sort of gesture, and other times some people view it as a being more open. Certainly, comparing hands on the hips is much better if you want to convey a feeling of you're open to what people are saying than this posture here or this posture here. These are closed. I don't want to hear what you're saying. Maybe an arched eyebrow. This could be considered an aggressive posture, particularly if the person is leaning towards you in the slightest little bit. Um, Generally, we don't say when the legs are completely open like this that they have a closed mind. Generally, it's got something to do with right here, crossed legs, not open to communicating. So here, you don't really know, but generally we would say legs apart a little bit. All right, I'm sort of listening. Here, the fact that people sometimes wear sunglasses and they're trying to talk to you about something significant or important really makes it difficult because it does conceal a certain amount of facial expression, particularly the eye movement and all of that. So for some people, it's just suspicious. For others, this posture here, if you put one foot forward and it's sort of towards the person you're communicating with, in some cultures, for some people, this means you may be getting ready to be hostile even on a lower subtle level. So we need to be aware of these things. And I will tell you that learning to interpret body language is a valuable tool. It helps you communicate better with people. It certainly helped me understand where my students are coming from sometimes. Um, be having a conversation with a student and I'll see they're really emotional. I'll try and look at their posture and what they're saying, and then I'll get an idea of how serious are they taking all this, and then okay, that's the level of seriousness I ought to take it with. It gives you information that you can act on. There's also communication from the organizational standpoint, and this is going to include both formal and informal communication channels. So when we talk about our formal communication channels, we look at these graphics at the bottom. We look at the vertical and the horizontal. Here's vertical, where information is going from top to bottom, and then subordinates are giving feedback from bottom to top. So that's vertical, it goes up and down. Here is horizontal communication between peers. These are both first level managers. So purchase request goes to the purchase manager, feedback on the form goes back to the initiator of the form, maybe for final signature, this might be for approval, this might have the final step of sending out or changing your mind or whatever it is, but you've communicated laterally. Now, external communication, of course, is when you communicate outside of the company. Now, sometimes that's going to happen by a person in a particular department, say in a bidding process, but most of the time, external communications are handled by top leadership, and they decide whether or not you need a marketing department or a public relations department to handle all communications, and there should be some sort of policy there. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the informal communication channels. Um, these are always interesting. Um, these are the ones that people communicate and trade information that do not follow the chain of command or the organized way of communicating in any organization. And they may or may not give you the real truth. The first one, I think, an informal channel that management uses that's really not on here is this idea of, I think it might have been on the previous slide, is management by walking around. And this was initiated originally at Hewlett Packard. I don't remember which one of the two was the one. I think it might have been Packard. He used to walk around and just talk to all his managers and indeed start conversations with regular operating employees and just talk to them and get a sense of how things were going. And he called it management by walking around. And it was a when you think about it, a consultative approach and so forth, and so does fit in today where what we say is good management. Um, but these other methods here, these do bypass the official ones like the manager would have his walking around sort of style. We have the grapevine. The grapevine is often the rumor mill. That's the way most of us look at it. But the grapevine, we all understand what that is. It is the ultimate unofficial communication channel. And it could be face to face because you talk to someone who's in a place and position, a certain job that knows things, that hears things. It may be on social media, maybe through email or texting or voicemail or whatever. But the grapevine is composed of people who find out things and who spread them around. It is very interesting when we start talking about the grapevine and so forth. For one thing, it is faster than formal channels of communications. So say a really important memo gets dictated by a middle manager or say a top manager, a VP, to his secretary to be dispersed to all managers and then dispersed to all the operating employees. And it's something serious like we're going to add a new shift and there are promotions and jobs available, or we're going to have to cut back operations and we're going to have to lay people off. Something significant. Certainly before that memo gets completely disseminated and read by everyone who it first gets sent out to, pretty much everybody in the company will know about the contents of the memo through one source or another. That's the grapevine at work. And what is very interesting is that it is about 75% accurate most of the time, the grapevine. And really, people in an organization tend to rely on the grapevine when they are not getting the proper information, the appropriate information from formal channels from their top managers. So if an organization does not keep people informed about things they think about, things they care about what's going on in the company, there is no reason for top management to keep all kinds of things about the company secret that employees want to know. If you do that, you disseminate information, you lessen the impact and the use of the grapevine because there is that 25% or so that is inaccurate, and you don't want that going on. Now, when we talk about also other informal communication channels, we have to talk about the liaison individuals. These people are the gossips. You know who they are and the jobs you've already had. Often, these liaison individuals are very important to the grapevine. And generally, they are a consistent source of information. But you do have to be careful to the accuracy and the intent of the information. People can manipulate information by leaving things out just as well as giving inaccurate information. And then we have this notion of organizational moles, certainly related to, but not the same ones that the critters that dig up holes in your yard. These are people who are using the grapevine and other informal sources of information I've mentioned here to further their own interests. These are the snitches. These are the people always running to management behind everyone's back or to the teacher and tattling. Most of us have a pretty low opinion of snitches and organizational moles and so forth. So it is what it is. But they are an informal communication channel. And they do spread information, and often, because they are working on their own agendas, this might be part of the source of some misinformation that's out there. Okay, we did, in our little video, saw that choosing the proper channel, the communication media, is pretty important. The choices of the channel for a manager are almost endless today. We do employ the contingency approach for choosing a channel, just like we do for making strategy or everyday decisions. We look at the context of the situation. We say what is the most appropriate, who needs to know, who doesn't need to know, what is the fastest, what's the most effective and efficient way of getting it done. It's a contingency approach. So we understand our environment, and when it comes to communicating, we respond appropriately. You have to understand your audience, though. It's absolutely vital to picking the channel to communicate with them. So media selection is really that key component of effective communication. And the contingency model really fits in with the current way we view management in general, that it relies on two main factors, though, when we talk about picking the right communication media. what is the media richness, and what is the complexity of the problem or situation. So let's just talk about those communications real quickly here. Media richness is really about the capacity of any communication channel or medium to convey your information and promote understanding. In other words, what is the best way to communicate? This is a great graphic right here to show which types of media are richest. The richer the media or the channel, the more effective your communication is going to be. So, of course, the complexity of the situation also determines and it mitigates to a certain extent what your choice of media is and will be and how effective it will be. In other words, something super important, very significant that affects people in dramatic ways is not something you send text about. You probably want to avoid a mass email. This is where you need to go to face-to-face. So if you look at these sorts of mediums, this is in media richness, the order. Face-to-face, obviously, if you're talking to a person face-to-face, you can see the expressions, hear the tone of voice, see the posture, all those nonverbal as well as the words themselves. Video conferencing is just short of that. You're not really there, but you're close to it. The telephone, though, that is completely different. And you may today, using Skype and whatever technology, be able to see each other on a phone call. I do it all the time with my grandkids now. We Skype on our phones. Two-way radio here, lots of noise and distortion in the background. Not the best medium to trying to make a important communication. And in fact, it's out there in the public and everyone is hearing it, even if you are directing it to a certain person, because you're calling out their call sign and so forth and trying to find them. And everybody else is hearing it, waiting to hear their call sign. Using a document, well, this could be a letter, which is very slow. So as a medium for richness, it can't even approach the effectiveness and the potential for getting your message across, your intent of your meaning with a letter. But it is effective if time is not a factor, and maybe you need a record of some sort. But email is quicker, of course. Those are both considered written documents. And then certainly a bulk mail sort of approach is, even in the marketing world today, realizes that bulk mail has such a low percentage of response. It's not really effective that well. Certainly doesn't work well for organizational communication and so forth. Or a poster. Okay, a poster is great for raising awareness about a legal issue, and you have to comply with putting up information about a legal issue. You're an organization, you have to inform people. The law says so. But you don't send a poster out or put a poster up for some really important information you want everybody to see. So richer mediums at the top, leaner mediums at the bottom. So in the same sense, your communication using these various channels or mediums, more effective up here and less effective down here. Let's wrap this up by talking a little bit about the impact of digital media on organizational behavior. The biggest issue that we see here is about issues of privacy and security. We are certainly in a time where anybody's personal information, their privacy, can be stolen. In fact, myself and my wife's identities have been stolen numerous times. Even Westminster College here was hacked a number of years ago, where they got everybody's social security number who worked here, and I believe our tax returns. I remember that year talking to colleagues, and we were talking about, have you filed your taxes yet, and all that, just sort of general conversation, and several had mentioned they filed their taxes and found out the government said, hey, somebody already filed your taxes. These things happen. This is why I have a landline still. I screen all calls with a answer machine because I'm getting scammed all the time and spammed, and it's maddening. So I just don't dare answer the phone and talk to somebody I don't recognize the number. These are issues of security and privacy. And for an organization, these sorts of things are important, that we safeguard the information we have. So organizations have to take steps. They have to guard your information. They have to provide that security. And because of the technology we have today, it is easy for unscrupulous individuals to invade your privacy and indeed violate the security of our organizations, and they can do harm to us. I have a video here from YouTube. I put it on the website for you, and I would like you to watch it. It's from PBS. It's an excellent documentary style. It's not real long, and it talks about issues of security and privacy in today's contemporary world. I will put a few questions for the final exam there from that video. So take a look at it, though. The information is very interesting, and it's not very long. Okay, folks, that's all I've got for you this time. I'll talk to you again soon.